Right, welcome everybody. I think we're going to have a few late joiners, but we want to get started to make sure we get through the material. We'll just start off with a couple of introductions. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Leigh. I'm a data strategist. I work primarily in further and higher education, and I ran the last webinar we talked about, which we'll put a link in later. We talked about how do you create a pragmatic data strategy. And so what you can see on your screen is that was step 2, and now we're moving on to step 3. So before I talk about what we're going to do today, I just let Nicola introduce herself.
Thank you. So my name's Nicola Askham. I'm known as the data governance coach, and I've made it my mission to help as many people as possible be successful at data governance. And so over the last few years, I've worked quite a number of occasions with Alex, and that seems to further my mission of helping more people be successful at data governance. So I love the opportunity to do these kind of webinars and get the message out to a wider audience.
Good stuff. So the message that we're talking about today is really how do you kind of take the data strategy that we talked about in the last webinar, and how do you kind of operationalize that? How do you kind of make that come to life? Because the work I've been doing, and Nicola's the same, over the last 10 or 15 years, people get very excited about a strategy and a framework and all of this kind of stuff. But unfortunately, it sometimes fails to launch. It's not, people are not able to get sort of past the strategy and into the implementation, or certainly not into the implementation in a way that it becomes sustainable. And what Nicola and I are all about is doing things that are sustainable. You know, we don't want this to be something that you do and then it stops working. So we're going to focus today, and we've got some great questions already, and we've certainly left time for Q&A because we know that's always a big part of what we do in these webinars. We're going to focus today on how do we get this strategy implemented. And we're going to use talk about sort of data governance being the sort of the jumping off point, the foundation for that, and that's Nicola's real area of expertise. So I'm just going to let Nicola just kind of talk a little bit about why we're using data governance as our sort of jumping off point before we kind of get into the main part of the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think the thing you need to think about is that data governance is, well, it sounds boring, which sounds a really awful thing to say. And actually somebody at an event last year introduced me as the next speaker up as Nicola Askham. You should listen to what she talks about because it's quite boring, but it's really important, which I kind of took exception at and said, it's not boring, but I get what you're saying. So he took it really, really well. And he reintroduced me as this is Nicola Askham. She helps you do data governance, which is critical and is a foundation for everything else you want to do with data. Because data governance actually gives you this framework of roles and responsibilities. Now, most of us, when we're doing data governance, we initially do it to support data quality. It's the one other data management discipline that's the most closely aligned with. It's not the only one. It helps everything. It helps you make consistent decisions and manage your data consistently from whatever angle, whether that's data architecture, data warehousing, master data management. It really, really is important. And if you have this in place, it makes it so much easier for everything else to work and happen and happen at the right order and the right way, because you've got the right people making consistent decisions about your data. And the other thing you need to think about is, it is just like foundations, like Alex said to begin with. It is that, that thing you put in place first. Now, we had an extension done a few years ago, and, personally, I was horrified at the amount of time and the amount of money the foundations cost. And we will hopefully never see them ever again. But they were really, really important, because now we're happy that that part of our house shouldn't fall down and sink and subside or anything, because we put in that effort to get it right. And it's the same with data governance. And that is why we tend to pick on it. And, the other thing that we always like to say is data governance is not a project. Now, I recognize a couple of my client names on the list of participants, so this, you've heard me say this so many times. Data governance is not a project. Now, Alex likes to call it a sustainable lifestyle, which always kind of makes me smile. And it's true, because data governance is the thing that's going to help you do this, proactive management of data in your organization, getting some really good benefits from so many different other data management disciplines. One of my coaching clients actually did an interview with him on my blog a little while ago, and he's a data scientist that was trying to put in place data governance at his organization. And he is fabulous at using analogies to describe data. So I recommend you go and read the blog if you're interested in finding other ways you might be able to sell it to people. But he summed up data governance in a way that I just love, because he said most people in your organization want data governance to be a pill. it's like a diet pill. You take it, the weight falls off, you live happily ever after. And he says, but it's not like that. We know it's not like that for diets, and it's not like that for data governance. Data governance and the data governance team is not a quick pill and a quick fix. It's almost like they're your personal trainer for data in your organization to make sure that we get to this sustainable lifestyle that Alex talks about.
Yeah, thanks, Nicola. I think that's nothing really to add on that, but I do think you have to. I think one of the reasons that sometimes we're not successful in going from strategy to implementation is because of exactly what Nicola said. It's hard. I call it the hump. It's hard to get data governance in place. We're going to hopefully, over the next sort of 20 minutes, talk to you about some of the key things that you can do. And again, one of the things that I think we're going to answer later is I know somebody's going to say, what's the framework? And we're going to talk to you about why there isn't a framework. And I think that's really important to understand that your organization is different to everybody else's organization. It doesn't mean that you're so special you have to have something totally bespoke, but it does mean that you have to understand the culture and the way your organization operates to best design a framework that kind of fits in with that. What you can't do is to try and sort of mandate that people are going to start acting differently from tomorrow, because that's where the classic framework play fails. So we're not going to talk about saying you must do everything like this in this order. We're just going to give you the building blocks and explain to you how you would put them in place for your own organization. So on that note, Nicola, should we go to the second slide?
Yeah. Oops, that didn't work. I love it when technology doesn't do what it's supposed to.
There we go.
You can see it now.
So for those of you who joined us last time, and let me just see if I do have the link here. Here we go. So there's a link here to the webinar that we ran about a month ago, talking about data strategy, and we used a similar graphic here. So we're going to try and be consistent, because that seemed to work well for people. And what we're really looking at here is saying when we're implementing data governance, there's three areas that you need to focus on. Now, we've already talked about strategy, and I think that if you want to learn more about that, go back and look at that link. Feel free to get back in touch with us later, but we did 45 minutes on exactly how do you do the strategy. So we're going to focus on the framework and the implementation. And I think that should give you an insight into how do you kind of crack this nut? How do you kind of eat the elephant? Where do I get started? So Nicola's going to kick off and talk about her kind of pragmatic and experienced view about what is a good data governance framework.
Thanks, Alex. So, I agree with everything that Alex has said about, there's no such thing as a standard framework. I even created one of my YouTube videos about that only a few weeks ago. I can't tell you how many times over the years that I have had LinkedIn messages or emails saying, can you give me a copy or direct me to a good standard framework, please? And you keep going, but why? This was a theoretical exercise designed for no organization in particular. Why do you think it's going to work for your organization? So I would be lying if I said that of all the data governance frameworks that I've designed over the years, they don't have a lot of common elements and they don't have a lot of similarities, but it's the subtleties that make all the difference in making this get accepted and be useful for your organization. So generally, I think a framework, I've got foundation stuck in the brain now. A framework is made up of three things. So you need a data governance policy or a data policy, whatever you want to call it, to make it resonate in your organization. The reason I say that is because I did it for many years, the beginning of this, of my career, of my data governance career, that is, without a policy. And I was doing it on a best endeavors basis. And, I have huge amounts of energy and enthusiasm when it comes for data governance. And by sheer perseverance, I managed to convince people we should be doing this. And they joined in and did it, and it was great. And then somebody went, why are we doing this? We've got all these other priorities. We've got lots to do. Do we have to do this? And I'd be stuck going, well, but we started doing it and you were helping me. Why are you not doing this anymore? So if you don't have that policy, you're doing it on a best endeavors basis. So, and you've wasted all this time and effort designing a framework that could be just, dismissed at a moment's notice because you actually have no real authority to do it. But the second thing is, if you have a policy in place, it actually sends out a very loud, strong message to the whole organization that your senior stakeholders have agreed that data is an asset for your organization and it needs to be managed as such. And as we've spoken about on our previous webinars, and I'm sure we will speak about again, culture is absolutely everything. And we need to change the mindset of the people in your organization around data. And I will always rather have the carrot and sell the benefits. But at the end of the day, you need a policy that mandates doing data governance in your organization. And if you have that in place, then you can go around selling the benefits of it, but people actually don't have an option. They should be joining in and doing this for you. So you need a policy. You need to agree. I can say I'm being really optimistic in our little checklist we shared with you. You need to agree what processes you're going to implement, because you're not going to implement everything. What's right for one organization isn't what another one needs. So as we talked about in the strategy webinar, you need to determine what your organization needs, and then everything you design from then on is to meet those needs. So you might not need 101 processes. You might not need master data management processes because you're not doing master data management at this stage. So decide what processes you need and draft them. I would, however, say, please always have a data quality issue resolution process, because this is it is really vital, and it is a good way to get people on board that you're actually delivering benefits quickly being a relative term. But data governance, as we said, it's not a quick fix. It's going to take a long time for some of the benefits to come through. But if we have a place for people to notify you of data quality issues, and we can start to resolve some of them, that's probably the earliest way we will start delivering some benefits and get some stakeholder engagement when they start saying, they've saved money for them, or they've solved this problem. You're going to need to define your roles and responsibilities. Now, yes, I start with a standard set in mind, but it's quite funny how we tweak them, we change them, we add an extra layer of data owners if necessary. I don't always recommend that, very rarely, in fact, but if it's right, it's the right thing. Sometimes we don't have data owners and data stewards, we only have one. And therefore we change the level of seniority that we put that at. But what you choose has got to be right for your organization, and what you name them has got to be right for your organization. So as an example, one organization I work for said absolutely point blank, they could not call them data owners. It just wasn't even, they wouldn't even discuss it with me. So we called the data, what I would normally call a data owner, executive data steward. That worked for them. So, and I think it sounds a really silly, like mine little thing, but it's amazing how emotive role titles are. So you have to choose the role titles that are going to work and resonate in your culture. I don't like the word I've put on the slide now. I've said assign responsibilities. Do not, whatever you do, go, right, well, we're going to have data owners and that's you, and you. I don't mean that kind of assigning. I mean engage, identify, get them to sign up to take that role. This is definitely not a picking on the right people to do those roles. And once you've got some target data owners or whatever you're going to call them set up, then you probably are in a good state to start setting up your data governance council, committee, forum, whatever you want to call yours. Because in the early days, there can almost be like a program steering board. Now, we've said it's not a project, but the early stages do need to be run a little bit like a project, and to have like that program steering, making sure you are focusing on the right things at any one time, somewhere to escalate obstacles, help you overcome any challenges, really useful. And along with that, at this point in the stage of doing our framework, we need to define what deliverables are going to be in scope, because it's a bit like the processes. There are many different deliverables that you may choose to put in place as part of your data governance framework, but you might not need all of them, or you might not need all of them now. So a lot of my clients might say, yes, I do want all of them. But when we look at perhaps a timeline for implementation, then some of those deliverables are maybe next year or even the year after, because they're not going to deliver the benefits that we need most urgently. So we will get the benefits that they deliver at a later date when we focused on the things that are really important to our organization at the moment. So that's a very whistle-stop tour of the framework. And I'm going to let Alex talk a little bit about the implementation box.
Thanks, Nicola. Before I do actually have a question for you on that. And that is, I know we're going to talk about this a bit later, but in terms of when you start to develop the framework, who are you generally working with to do that? Is the consistency of the role in an organization, or do you find it's different with everyone? Or, because that's a question I get asked a lot, is who should be that person that kind of takes the lead from the organization?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it does change from organization to organization, depends on who's sponsoring it and leading it. But I think the very early stages, you need to be engaging with some very senior stakeholders. Now, probably not your CXO level because they're too high. It'd be nice to have one of them sponsoring data governance and engage with them, but you probably want one or two levels below them, depends on how big and how hierarchical your organization is. But we want some senior people engaged in helping us, because they're going to be the people that actually help with that culture change and help that I suppose it's getting that messaging out there and supporting it. If we haven't got them on board, it won't work. So if you're the data governance manager and you think you can sit and design a framework on your own and then just present it, think again. It's a kind of, even if you have a pretty good idea, and let's face it, you probably do. And Alex and I definitely have lots of ideas, but you don't go in and say to somebody, oh, well, I've thought about your organization or our organization, and here's a framework. They've got to think that they had some say in it. So this is why we need a number of meetings or workshops to engage with them and let them think that they're involved.
Yes, indeed, and the value they will get by sponsoring it. Yeah, I think it's worth just touching again on what Nicola talks about roles, and I think it's a wider point for me. So yeah, I work with mainly universities, and yeah, the concept of owner is difficult for a lot of universities. What we found, certainly with one university, was they are a very Prince-led organisation. So they follow a project management discipline, and there's a good culture and behaviours around the concept of the senior responsible officer in a Prince framework. So we called the data owners the data SROs because it sort of conveyed and attributed the behaviours that were already embedded, good behaviours at the university, to that person. And also a lot of the data owners had that role as senior sponsors or senior users in a project, and therefore they kind of understood a little bit about what this meant for data. So I think the wider point for me that Nicola's making is, don't be a framework fundamentalist. There is no place for ideology here. You really have to kind of work out how to sort of get this into your organization, as Bob Siner would say, almost non-invasively, not to be scared of it, not to say it's not important, but to do it in a way that people won't push back because they say that makes my job harder. And I think certainly data governance, things tend to get a little bit worse before they get better, and we'll kind of touch on that in the Q&A. And so you kind of need to have the strength of character to get you through that. But there's no point about beating your head against blocked doors if there's an easier way to do it. So I think when you're thinking about your framework, just think about your organization, think about the culture, as Nicola says, and just be prepared to be really adaptable to allow yourself to be successful. Which kind of leads me on to talk about implementation. And I think, again, if you look at what's on the slide here, we've kind of touched on some of these already. Getting the right people to be involved. Certainly, Nicola's point about the senior level sponsorship and having that sustained throughout the initial program and then further on in operation is vital. I think it's very hard to push data governance up. But I also think certainly I'm ex-Deloitte, and one of the things that we used to do, which I really can't agree with now, is that's all the people we dealt with. We always dealt with those really senior people and got them to buy into what we were doing without really seeing if it'd work on the ground. So I think when you're identifying the people, you need to get lots of different people who are either advocates of data at any level in the organization. I mean, these are the people that have the good data stories, but also people who are really unhappy potentially, or people who are struggling to see the value. You kind of need to make a big tent. So I think when you want to make data governance happen, you really need to think carefully about your stakeholders, and maybe it's as simple as doing like a stakeholder map with your influence and your power and all of that kind of stuff, or maybe you just know those people. But it is a discipline and it's worth doing. Don't just pick all the people that you think will say yes, and don't pick all the people that you think you have to knock over. It's definitely somewhere in between. I think the roadmap is having a roadmap and being able to track against plan. Again, you're trying to professionalize data. That's really important. But don't be afraid to pivot. Don't be afraid to move. The plan is the plan. It doesn't tend to survive first impact with the enemy. So we have to accept that, the plan's going to change because it's not working, or as likely, the organization changes underneath us. The priorities change. The things that we were focused on are suddenly no longer the things. So let's not go and do those. So again, don't spend days and days creating this amazing plan that you think you're then going to preserve in aspect, and then get really upset when it doesn't work. Just kind of go with kind of, something to get people to buy into it. And as you look further out, 6, 9, 12 months, you're going to be at a reasonably low level of detail at that point. Yeah, I think getting approval, I think formal approval, as Nicola says, is really important. I like, Nicola knows, I like people to write forwards to policy documents. I like people, senior people in the organization to be signed up, physically signed up to it. I like to have that available to be able to show people this is taken very seriously. But I do think an approval process is important, in the same way you get a project approved or a budget approved or a staff hire approved. You kind of go there with a business case. You kind of go, here's why we're doing it. Here, let's do that. Yeah, I think Nicola's point, don't tell your data owners they're data owners. I wish somebody had told me that earlier. That's a really short conversation, especially with data owner. If you're the head of finance, finance director, and you're the data owner for finance, you're not going to go and tell them that they are a data owner. They suddenly have got all this extra work they need to do. You need to kind of work out what's in it for them. And you need to get them. I mean, I think one of the things that Nicola taught me that's really key is that the owners need to nominate their stewards. You should not be nominating your stewards. You're not the subject matter expertise in finance. You're not the domain expert. You want the owners to be picking the people who are going to be your steward for, say, tax or accounts receivable or payable or whatever. So, and if the great thing about the owners picking the stewards is it empowers the stewards. Potentially, they then know that this is important work because their boss has asked them to do it, and he will give them time. He or she will give them time to carry out the activities associated with the role. I do think, yeah, community of the willing. We don't want to set up lots of new committees that don't do anything, but I think where you're dealing early on with big data quality issues that tend to be cross multi-domain, having working groups, task and finish groups to do that's really important. I also think if you have existing data groups in your organization, then you should try and use those first. Don't just create new groups and kind of let the other ones wither on the vine. They may not be fit for purpose. Their terms of reference might not be quite good enough. Their attendee makeup may be incorrect, but for all of those things, we can still use that body if it's kind of known and respected. I'd rather always repurpose a body than create a new one. And then the last bit, yeah, you can't over communicate data governance. You really can't. Nicola and I have both been in many situations where we've talked to people about data governance. They've nodded. They've said, this is fantastic. We want to do this. We've left the room and nothing has happened, because you have to have this consistent plan. So, for example, one of the things I talk about a lot is data-enabled universities. So every time I talk about data governance, I link it to the data-enabled university. I say, you want to be data-enabled university, you have to do data governance. This is what it means. I think these people must think I'm stupid because I have to keep telling them, but you just have to keep telling them because they will forget, because it's such a, data governance is generally, it's your low level of maturity in most organizations. It doesn't have the behaviors of the other assets. So you have to kind of start to get people to think about it in a different way. And that means to communicate. And again, it's, you may have one message, for me, a data-enabled university, but I have lots of different messages. If I'm talking to academics, or if I'm talking to professional services staff, if I'm talking to people on the front line, if I'm trying to convince the Vice Chancellor, they're different messages. I try and be consistent and coherent. And one of the things that we don't see enough of is often organizations have good internal communication channels, good communication specialists. We're not comm specialists. I always like to try and engage people that can help me and might want to push my content out and kind of make it feel bigger than it is just me doing it. So that's kind of implementation in a nutshell. I'm sure you've got some comments on that, Nicola. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was clearing my throat earlier and forgot I didn't unmute myself. So I probably don't need to add much. You've been very thorough, and as is we know that we've worked together enough now that we know we think the same thing. I think probably the one thing I would pick up on is you can't over communicate data governance. When anybody does one of my training courses, I kind of say that to them almost as like a challenge. Please try, prove me wrong. But I think the trouble is you'll be juggling so many balls when you're doing data governance that comms is the one thing you tend to forget. Well, I certainly do. And yeah, I spend my time teaching people it's really important to do comms. It's just that one thing that you're doing the work and you focus on doing what you've got to do next and keep forgetting the communication. But you do need that message to be little and often getting out there to keep people engaged, particularly in the early days.
Mm.
So hopefully that's given you some ideas of what to do. And, it may look deceptively simple when we put it on one slide like this, but it's also, perhaps listening to us talk through it might sound really complicated, and it's actually neither. It's probably somewhere in the middle. So don't be off put. This is really doable. It just takes some time to plan and think it through and do it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing to add there. Do you want to go on to the next slide, Nicola?
No more slides. We're going to live questions.
We are getting live questions. Thank you. Right, there we go. So we asked you for some questions, and you provided us some really interesting ones. We've not picked all of them, but we've tried to pick the ones we could answer, and also where there was some overlap, we picked a question hopefully can cover off 2 or 3 answers in one go. So
yeah, and we are hoping to have time, just to add, to answer some more. So we've already got, I think, 1 or 2 in the chat already. So if while we're talking this, you think of questions or you've already thought of questions, please type them in there and we'll cover as many as we have time for at the end.
Good point. So the classic one, and I'm going to ask Nicola to answer this one, is we get asked this all the time: is data governance owned by IT or the business, and why? Just before we start, IT and the business are not different things. Let's just not get into that to start with. I really, it's like we all walk through the door. Well, we don't. We walk through the virtual door. We all work for the same company. Let's not set up artificial barriers. But the question is a fair one, and Nicola,
Yeah.
I'm sure is going to give you a good answer.
So, well, I hope it's a good answer. In my experience, data governance should be owned by the business. Absolutely no argument about that, because they own the data. So they should be the ones running the data governance initiative. Because if it comes from IT, it is seen quite often as an IT initiative that is being done to the business. And this is not about imposing anything on anyone. This is about the business deciding that they want this framework. Okay, it needs a lot of help and influence from you to convince them that they need it. But this has got to be a business run program, because this is about engaging the business and getting them to understand that they need to step up, own data, own the data requirements and everything. I've got a free report on my website that says like top data governance mistakes and how to avoid them. And I think number 1 is data governance being run from IT. And I've seen it done so badly when it's done from IT, but that doesn't mean that you can't run it from IT. So whilst I put that in the report, because I've seen lots of things go wrong because of it being done out of IT and the business just not being engaged, you can do it. I have done it for clients or with clients because that is just the way they got set up or the only way they could get funding for it. It can be done, but you need to do even more business engagement than ever before. This must not be seen as a technology project that's being enforced upon the business. And most of the time, most organizations I've worked with don't even have budget for tools. So this isn't something that should be being run as a technology project out of IT. I hope that helps.
I think you've really good answer, Nicola. I think it's interesting just seeing a thing on the comments saying business abdicated their responsibility, and I would broadly agree with that. And I think if we think about why that is, it's because what's happened is data became an IT thing because it came about storage and integration. It became about things that kind of linked together. So we forgot about the water. We just remembered about the pipes, and because of that, IT became almost a de facto owner of data because they were doing all the plumbing. And one of the things that sometimes I think IT groups have been quite mendacious and not done a good job around data and kind of felt that they wanted to own it. But more often what I find is that they don't know what the data's for. They don't know how it's used. They would love somebody else to do it, but nobody's prepared to take it on. So I also think IT groups have been, and I've probably been guilty as well, thinking that maybe technology is the solution. An enterprise service bus will save us, a master data management system will save us, a data quality tool will save us, and we know that's not the case. So I think that kind of thinking actually drives the sort of the expertise, the wider business expertise, further away, because they go, oh, well, they're just doing IT stuff. So I would take your point, David.
Yeah, and I also think I get entirely what David's saying about the business. I think the business, the thing I have found is the business probably, as you said, many years ago abdicated responsibility about data, but nobody has educated them and explained to them why they need to be responsible for it. And in my personal experience, I've seen that changing a lot. I would say even over the last 2, 3 years, I don't have the conversation about whether this is IT or not. Very, very rarely. Whereas before it was much more common. Um, it doesn't take long. And when you do, I think where IT stood up and took responsibility for it because nobody else was, and they realized that something had to be done. And as Alex has said, they're normally very happy to work with you to help you get it in the right place, because they then get good data requirements from the business, which makes it easier for them to do their job. And then comes back to what you were saying about Alex. We are all actually on the same side. We shouldn't be against each other. It's not a them and us. So actually, if the business give really good data requirements, the IT are in a much better position to be able to deliver against them. And then everybody lives happily ever after in my rose-tinted world.
Yes, yes. I remember thinking I'd cracked it once when I was running EA for somebody, enterprise architect somebody, and something came through the project stream, and somebody had from the sort of, I think the finance team or had created a conceptual model as part of the design. I thought, that's it, we've cracked it, we've kind of moved it out of IT. So that was a great thing. Okay, we're going to move on because we've got other questions and other things in the chat here. So we had a question, Nicola, I think this was a short version, which said, is the process helping or necessarily complicating the original tasks?
Oh, that is a good question. And it's something that I've had, and you've probably had the same, so much pushback over the years when I go, oh, we're doing data governance to help you. And people go, well, you're clearly not. You're going to make life too complicated for me. So I would say the aim is never to make it too hard for your organization to do whatever it does. If you are making it too hard, there are too many controls, too many hurdles, then you're doing data governance wrong. The idea of this is to not to complicate things, but to enable things by making sure the right data of the right quality is available for people to do their jobs. And that does mean that we have to put controls in place at some points. But what we've got to do is be realistic about this, focus on putting controls on the really critical data. Because if somebody has told you that this data is absolutely vital to our organization, they look a bit stupid if you say, right, well, we'd like to define it, perhaps do some data quality rules, do some data quality reporting. If they go, oh, no, we can't be bothered with that, they look a bit stupid because they've just told you that data was really critical and now they don't want to do any effort around it. And if something goes wrong with that data, they're going to look even more stupid. So I think what you need to do is perhaps rein yourself in. Perhaps I'm only talking about me, but my experience, I want everything perfect. I want all data really lovely and organized and great quality. That's a huge amount of effort and nobody's going to sign up to that. And to be fair, why should they? We're going to make it, as you say, we're going to be unnecessarily complicating things. But if we can get, a pragmatic approach that puts the focus in the areas where it's really needed and deliver some benefits there, then we're doing the right things. And I actually have, I go in and help organizations sometimes just do their data owner briefings and trainings because people are scared about doing that. And I've gone in and helped. And I've actually had a number of data governance managers who've looked at me kind of gone a bit pale when I go, and when I get challenges like this and they say, oh, what if I'm finding this too hard and it makes it too hard for us to do our work? And I go, great, well, contact Fred. Tell them they're doing data governance wrong and change it. You've got my permission. You see the poor data governance manager normally goes pale and I go, and afterwards I say to them, but you're not doing it right if it is too hard for them. So you always bear that in mind when you're designing and thinking about what to do.
Yeah, nothing to add there. There's some interesting questions coming in as well. So hopefully we can get to
so
that.
We'll go through the ones that were pre-submitted then. So is it my turn to ask a question instead of answering it? Great. So this one, we did have a number of questions all around where do you start? What do you do first? So, so I'm trying to, this is a real muddle of all the words that we had in the questions. But, if you were tasked, Alex, with actually starting an inaugural data governance program, a new organization or institution, what would you do first? And we also had some questions around what's the most efficient way to do data governance.
Yeah, and again, I think it comes back to that point I was making at the start, is that one size fits none. But the things that hold, if you want to start, institutions are kind of my heartland, so I know how complicated they are, and everybody's got different views and data is generally in silo, is I think you have to go after things that you know people care about. So for example, if you look at somewhere like HE, regulation, external reporting, sort of league tables. So a lot of the external stuff has a really high profile with sort of senior leadership teams. So, you know, maybe that's where you start if you're looking to improve the quality of that, because that's already on their agenda. But in terms of where do you who do you try and find? I try and find the people that have the dirtiest data and work with them. So, you know, planning groups, reporting groups. So people who really want some help, people who maybe spend half their time cleaning data before they can use it. People who are sort of stuck having to move data from system A to system B by just doing swivel chair integration and all of this kind of stuff. So I think you've got to do a little bit of thinking around. There's a question about non-invasive data governance, Bob Sinister. You've got a little bit of thinking about what you've got to kind of set the vision out a little bit. You've got to think, what does good look like? You know, what if we could do these things, what can't we do at the moment that we want to do, and what do we really want to do in the future? And I think you've got to kind of craft that messaging. So when you talk to people, you're saying, are you interested in this? And they go, yes, I am. It's like, okay, well, we can't get there from here, right? The current state is unsustainable, so I now need your help. And I think then you have to, it's like Nicola said, it's a real balancing act between having some kind of professional service with data accountability and quality logs and all of that kind of stuff that feels like a real thing that you can use to fix things differently in a better way and in a sustainable way, against spending 2 years building this monolith at the end of which nobody knows what it's for. So I can't give you exactly where you start answer, but I always start where the problems are, and generally I get called in by people that have those problems. And then I always create some kind of shared to be state about where do we want to go. And then I look at what's the minimum we need to do. And it's still quite a lot to allow us to show progress. So more people want to get involved with us, and then we can build things out bigger. You know, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, do I need to do all domains? And you know, yes, I like to do all domains, but sometimes it's not appropriate. You might not want to go after that domain because it's horrible or that person's being really difficult. So again, you have to kind of think about your framework implementation, about what works best for your organization.
Yeah, and as you were talking, actually, Alex, you made me think about a webinar I did in the summer called Minimal Data Governance. And it is that, you know, what's the minimum you can do, and you know, what can you then use that to build upon. So I will find the link and share that for you, actually, if anybody is interested in seeing that, because actually minimal data governance is a good starting point, whether you do intend to do the whole organization and all domains at a later date. It's a good way of thinking about what as a bare minimum do you really need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if you want to find that, Nicola, I'm going to ask you another question first, so you might have to multitask.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll do my best.
So one of the things that, again, we're glad to see this question because we get asked it a lot, is what content should go into creating a business case and charter to start the data governance, and how do we structure these documents, all these separate documents? So it's kind of relating to the last question, is you know, kind of what's the business case feel like? And again, I think Nicola will be able to shed some light on that.
Yeah, and I think there's I think it might still be on my website. I did create like a business case checklist years ago, going through the kind of things you'd want to put in it. But it's a bit like, you know, we keep saying it time and time again, I'm afraid. But you know, your business case is going to be unique to your organization. So I don't recommend that you kind of go along to a networking group, which networking groups are really good. I'm not saying don't go to them, but don't meet somebody and go, oh, great, you've done that already. Can I have yours? I'll copy and paste it and just change our organization name, because it won't work. It all comes down to the message that, you know, we've said it a few times, but it's a bit of a hobby horse of ours, is you've got to find out why your organization needs to do data governance. What problems are you trying to solve? Because if you write a business case based on best practices, so I went into one of my clients a few years back, and they had, it was a kind of bizarre document, which was a cross between a data strategy and a business case. And I was reading it and I kept thinking, oh, this is really, really funny, because it doesn't seem at all relevant to this organization. But yet I swore it looked familiar. And I kept thinking, well, this is weird. But it was actually just a few weeks after Alex and I had been doing an intensive piece of work and run a number of workshops for an organization. And I suddenly got onto page 3 of this document, and it had some real HE terminology. And I thought, and this, by the way, was not a higher education organization that I was working with at the time. And I thought, they found this online. And so I literally Googled, I found what they had done online, and guess who authored it? Alex had done it, and it had been shared as an example by the client he'd created it for many years ago. And my client had picked it up and tried to use it. And I can tell you, it's a disaster if you do that, because people going, but why do I need this? You know, this isn't relevant to us. So in your business case, you probably have a standard template for business cases in your organization. So definitely use that. One way to wind people up is not to use the formats that they are comfortable and familiar with. So with all things, whatever document you do for data governance, look to see what your organization does in other areas for that. But I would actually start saying, you know, before you even do the business case, you've got to do this piece of work, understanding what are the drivers for data governance for your organization. And then your whole business case is about building that up. And kind of making the case for what's in it for your organization as a whole. And, you know, therefore you should make it easy for people to sign off. Although I should kind of give a caveat to that data governance business cases are not easy to get signed off, because a lot of the benefits you're talking about are intangible and might happen. So the trouble you have is you're saying to people, if you let us do data governance, we're going to deliver you loads of benefits, and they might be this kind of thing, but I can't tell you exactly what kind of thing we're going to do until we do it, but we can't do it unless you give us money to start doing it. So you can see the conundrum. If you're a senior stakeholder, if you aren't able to articulate any benefits that sound at all interesting to me, why would I give this mad data governance woman money to go and do something that may give me some benefits, but she won't tell me which ones precisely until they happen?
Yeah.
So always challenge to a business case. Chart is an interesting question. A chart is almost like your terms of reference for what you're doing. I often don't do them, to be fair. And again, it comes down to the culture of the organization. If you have an organization that has a charter for new initiatives, then you must do one, because if you don't, you're bucking the trend and people question what you're doing it. If you don't have a culture of having charters for everything, like probably the majority of people I've worked with, then don't do one. Because what you're doing is adding more formality, more documentation, making it look hard. So what you need to do is keep it simple. But what I would say is your charter, what you would put in your charter is the kind of things that you need to be putting in your comms, but not in a formal documentation. So you need to think about everything we've been saying. We kind of repeat ourselves a lot in this one, but it's because these are important points. Why is your organization doing data governance? What is your vision? So when Alex was talking about his 2B state, that's your vision. What is your vision for your data? What is it to support? Are you doing data governance because it's fun and Nicola and Alex told us to? Or are you doing it because it's going to support some amazing new initiative? Perhaps you want to embark on data science, data big analysis projects. Perhaps you're doing a digital transformation. That's the kind of thing that you would put in your charter. Is why are you doing this and supporting it, and what kind of things are you going to do as a result of it? Yeah, I think that's probably enough to get you started on those two.
Yeah, nothing to add on that other than don't write documents that people aren't going to read. And I sometimes think, you know, before you're even producing those documents, I would have gone round and really taken the pulse of the organization. I would have found out what was clicking people's buttons. So if I am going to produce those documents, it's going to resonate with those people. I'm not going to just try and second guess a complex organization and think, because these are things that matter to me, well, that's not really very relevant. What matters to you, it's what matters to the wider organization. So the last submitted question we've got, and we've still got a good 10 minutes left, so I'm hoping we can get through some of these excellent questions that I've seen on the chat, is, this is kind of the catch-all, isn't it? Is the goal to ultimately govern all data a company has? Now, we didn't actually add in this question, do you mean structured or unstructured? So let's assume it's structured data, stuff that's stored in systems.
Yeah.
And if it's not, how do you identify what data is your critical data? And how do you actually work out how to create these business use cases, which are the most important? So how do you do that?
How do
So
I
again,
do
I'm going to
that?
give that one to Nicola, because that's hard.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So a few years back, I spent the vast majority of my time working in the insurance industry, because they had a new regulation which required that they did data governance over some of their data. Now, it wasn't primarily a regulation about data. It was about solvency and insurance companies proving that they were solvent enough. And the regulators got wise at the last economic recession, not the one we're all entering into now, that, you know, a number of insurance companies and banks around the world were not as solvent as their returns to their regulators may have led them to believe. And so the regulators got wise, and they realized that, we need to have some assurance that the data that went into these solvency calculations was good quality and the right data. So therefore they asked for data governance to be put in place over that data. But so Solvency II was the directive for Europe, and the insurance companies actually had a really good concept called proportionality. And they understood that some of the inputs into those calculations were far more critical than others. And some of the things, if you put in there and it was wrong or it was missing, it would not change the final figures very much at all. But other data, if it was wrong, would change it significantly. So they required you to have this proportionate approach and put the controls where they were most needed, which goes back to the answer I was giving earlier about unnecessarily complicating it. You need to be proportionate in your approach. And Solvency II actually called this concept materiality, and they wanted you to put the most controls over the most material data. And that kind of is what this question's all about. So as soon as I stopped working in insurance kind of all the time, I started talking to other sectors, and I found it is a concept that works regardless. The only thing, if you work in a manufacturing sector, using the words materiality doesn't work, because material data means something entirely different. But use critical data, important data, whatever terminology works for you. But we've got to work out how the best way to do this. Now, the best way I think to identify it is, first of all, you've got to have some criteria, because we need to be consistent. Because I can tell you from my early days experience of trying this approach, if you ask everybody, if I say, Alex, is all the data that you own critical to this organization? And Alex is feeling really important. He goes, yes, absolutely. All my data is really, really critical. And then I say to him, oh, great. Well, we need you to put these extra controls in place, do some data definitions, and we're going to do some data quality reporting. At which point Alex goes, actually, no, I don't think any of my data is really critical. I don't want to do all that. So what we have to do is find something so we can be consistent across the whole organization. So we need to define however many layers of materiality we want. And I would say from experience, a three-way high, medium, and low works best. And what we need to do is come up with some clear criteria, get them signed off, and then we need to work with the business. Now, I would get that materiality criteria signed off before you even do your data discovery and decide what, so at a high level, ideally, I would tell you to go and do conceptual data models with each function, identify what data they use and produce, and then get them to use that criteria to allocate everything on your conceptual data model as high, medium, or low. And then you've got a really good, starting place. So, and that then helps you come up with the business use cases, because once you start doing conceptual data model workshops, people start talking to you about the challenges they have. You can start working out where, which are the biggest problems, as Alex was saying. Let's find our biggest problems and go back and answer them. Cool. So again, a very quick answer. So we're trying to jam pack as much advice as possible into this webinar.
I think we should try doing some speed answers. I'm going to take these questions and maybe we'll just answer them in turn. So I'll take this one and throw the next one at you. How's that sound?
Okay, we're going back to the start then and working
I'm going back to the start, because I definitely want to get to the one about deep recessions at the bottom. That's a really good question.
I was too busy talking. I can't read and talk at the same time.
What tools do you need for data governance? That is a whole different conversation, and I think it's a question that you shouldn't be asking at the start. Tooling around profiling, cleansing, data governance, workflow, out the back end, all of that kind of stuff. There's an amazing set of tools out there. It's getting bigger and bigger all the time. You don't start with a tool. The tooling is something that I think you can look to invest in as you develop your capability around data governance, and you can show the value of having the tool. Tool-led data governance initiatives, I am very wary of. So I'm not going to add anything else to that. I don't know if you want to add anything, Nicola.
No, just totally agree. Listen to Alex and pay attention.
But if you want, there is, we probably will do a discussion about tooling at a later date and talk to you about what we've seen and what's good and how it works, and kind of show you some different kind of ideas. We're not going to recommend anything, that's not our gig, but we will maybe do some of that. We've been asked a few times. Right, here's one for you, Nicola. With regard to policy, do you have any views on a single overarching data governance policy versus individual policy for handling security, ethics, ownership, champions, stewards? So is it one big document?
Yeah. Good question. So before I do that one, there was another policy question earlier where I was asked whether I could share an example policy. And I feel really, really mean in answering this one. But I do have example data governance policies. I don't think you should copy and paste data governance policies. But actually the examples I have are only given to my clients or people who do my training courses. And I actually from the names of the participants here, there's a number of people here that have done my training courses, and it's not really fair to them who've paid to do my training courses and to get those kind of templates and resources to then give them away to everybody else. So I'm really, really sorry for that. But what I would say is, don't Google and copy and paste one. You actually need to make the time to write the right policy for you, in the same way I talked about the business case. So just that was an aside. With regards to policy, do I have this views? So I'm a data governance geek. I would love everything to be neat and tidy in one overarching policy. I think it's probably very rare that has been the right thing for the client that I've worked with over the years. So it's generally, what do you think would be the best thing? So some of the things you've got in that list marker, like handling, security, they actually belong to other data management disciplines. So the team that's responsible for that should be writing their own policy. I think all things to do with data governance should be in the same policy. So your ownership, champions, stewards, all things generally data governance should be in one policy together. But I think what it comes down to is, what is going to serve your purpose the most? So for some organizations, they have been doing data governance a while before I've come and helped them, and we put the policy in to tidy up, to mandate it, to make it easier for them to actually do it. And in which case we have perhaps put more different disciplines in one policy, because it was neat and tidy and made it less confusing for the business who've been getting lots of messages about lots of things. If I'm starting to at the beginning, I tend to write a policy that covers only what I want to do in that next year. Because if we make it sound too complicated, people won't do it. And then you have the choice of either to add to that policy more sections as you go and things, or you can add separate policies. I think ethics is an interesting one. I haven't seen probably until only probably the last 2 years, would you say, Alex, anybody having ethics policies? I think such a good thing, particularly as people are now using data more than they ever had, and people are looking at monetization of data. And I actually love the fact that companies are thinking about data ethics policies. But I think whilst the data governance team should have an input into that, to make sure it aligns with their data governance framework and policy, they're probably not responsible for that. So yeah, hopefully that's given you some ideas.
Okay, we got a couple. I think we're going to get two more. Is what I think we can get it and answer them properly. So I'll have a go at this one, and then you want to prep yourself for what you do in a data governance in a recession. What that you can do that one.
Okay.
Okay. So question from Emilio is, how does this relate with non-invasive data governance, and how do you recommend engagement on a big size company where there's no stakeholders? Kind of two questions. So I assume you're talking non-invasive data governance, the book written by Bob Siner. Nicola and I both know Bob. Got a lot of respect for him. He's a titan in the industry. I've read Bob's book, as I'm sure a lot of you have. I don't agree with everything in it, but I've certainly taken things from it and used those in my own work. Obviously, with citations to Bob. So I think there's some very good things in it. I think it's a question of what's going to work for you. You can't, reading around the subject is great. If you read John Laidley, data governance book's pretty thin. You read Bob Siner's, you read Tom Redmond. If you read kind of the people who are really have kind of had a lot of time in the industry, I think it gives you a good grounding of what maybe works for you. So I wouldn't recommend one book or one framework, but I would recommend that you read them all, but consider them for your own context. I'm a big fan of non-invasive. I think it's the right way to go. I'm not a big fan of saying everything stops tomorrow we start doing everything new. The second question, no clear stakeholders. There always are stakeholders. There absolutely are people that care about data outputs or cost of data operation or risk or trust in data. They absolutely are there. You just need to go and find them. I don't know how to answer that question differently. You got anything to add to that, Nicola?
No, I totally agree with you. I was just sharing the link to Bob's book because somebody had asked.
It's a good thing. It's on my shelf somewhere, but it's good. The great thing about Bob's book,
it's on my book. It's on my shelf somewhere.
It's really thin. You can read it in like 3 hours.
Yeah.
4 hours.
So let me see. Yeah. So this is the common thing. So this is Bob's book. I don't know if you can see the thickness. Mm-hmm. Like I say, like Alex says, I like some parts of it. I disagree with some parts of it, but we're all entitled to our opinions. This is John Laidley's book, which is really, really useful. Brilliant. But you can see it's a bit more of a tome. And I have actually had people turn up on my training courses in the old days when we held them face to face with this book in their rucksack. And they've got all these post-it notes through it going, I don't understand this, Nicola. And can you explain that? So this is really, really good theory. If you want to understand chapter and verse, absolutely recommend it. It's perhaps a little bit daunting if it's your first reading on data governance. It's probably what I would say.
It's a big old methodology. What we should do, what we'll do on LinkedIn or something, we'll publish a bibliography of the books that we like, because
yeah,
we'll do
we
something.
Do photos of our bookshelves.
I've got my bookshelf over there. Yes, right, Nicola. I'm aware of the time, so you've got 2 minutes to talk about
how can companies help in a recession.
What do you do in a recession? Yeah.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I'm sure everybody on this calls on LinkedIn and you get all the LinkedIn posts. I got up this morning to find an email they'd sent me overnight with these are the data governance roles you might be interested in. And there are so many data governance lead roles out at the moment. And I think that is, it's fantastic and it's really, really refreshing. That in the face of everything and the hardship that we've all been going through this year, that people are actually understanding that data is at the heart of their survival, because companies are having to make big changes to ensure that they survive what's going on. And I think the companies that are going to survive are the ones that use their data in the correct way and don't make the wrong decisions. So I think I've mentioned it in 1 or 2 webinars that I've done in the past, so apologies to anybody who's heard it before. But I did some work last year with an organization who closed down one part of their business, nothing to do with recession, just because they were doing some analysis and realized the one part of their business wasn't profit making. So what they did was they closed it down. They then realized that the data they were using was not fit for purpose. It wasn't the data they thought it was, and included some other data which skewed the numbers, making that division look non-profitable. How bad is that? So they closed a profitable division. They made the decision not to reopen that because of the reputational damage of announcing what they'd done. So there's very few people who know that they did that. And I'm sworn to secrecy, so I won't tell you who it was and what they did. But, and this is what I think people are realizing, that, they've got to decide what's going on. One of my coaching clients, actually, I coached him 7 years ago. We did data governance. We were making really good progress. It got mothballed. It was deemed to be a nice to have. And going back to my other thing, I think he probably didn't have a data governance policy. It got mothballed, and it was a shame. Nice guy, really enthusiastic about data. He got in contact only a couple of months ago, and we're now working together again because during the lockdown, his organization temporarily shut down a number of their depots. And then they realized that actually they didn't lose that much money, and they were managing to service business across the whole country even without these depots. But they didn't understand the data, and they wanted to make sure they were doing the right decisions. And they remembered that that's what he'd done before, and they asked him to step back up. He's now head of data governance, and they are realizing that they need to pivot and make sure they're in a good enough shape to survive the recession. I think even actually in the last call we had, he actually said, they've decided they don't want to just survive the recession. They want to thrive. And they've realized that their data will tell them. And if they've got good data, they can make the right decisions to actually survive.
Maybe, yeah, so maybe we can do we're going to ask you in the next one, what do you want us to do in the future? We're going to do deep dives on stuff. And one of the things we might do is how do you sell DG in a recession? I think there's a whole cost of operation plus the value of data that Nicola's talked about. So thank you all. Brilliant questions. We just need to leave more time for questions and just do less talking, I think.
We've got to try not to be effusive about data governance.
The session's recorded. We'll get it out to you. If you've got any further questions, do let us know. We will be doing another one, the 4th one, the journey about how do you kind of go from when you've put it in to keeping it going, keeping the enthusiasm. That'll be maybe just before Christmas, not sure yet. But thank you all for attending and all your questions and all your enthusiasm. And as ever, it's a pleasure to talk to you all.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye all.